You just gotta imagine, dude, just slowly like pulling at it, man, like Play-Doh, just over the teeth. Oh, it's so grody.
Welcome. You're listening to PaleoCheeze Podcast, Episode 1. Wild at heart and weird on top.
Welcome, everybody, to the very first episode of the PaleoCheeze Podcast, wherein we toss a film under the chaise lounge to discuss it, to psychoanalyze, and to sometimes even point and laugh. I'm your host, Jeremiah Bannister.
And I'm your other host, Chad Lutzke.
Dude, this is going to be a lot of fun, man.
It is.
This is going to be tons of fun doing this because we haven't done anything in like forever in a Chinese New Year, and them buggers only come around like 2 or 3 times a year.
And film, dude. I mean, we both get excited about movies, and we've, done some movie reviews in the past that were more like, I wouldn't call it sketch comedy, but definitely unique.
Yeah. But dude, hey, first of all, I got to say this, man, before we go any further, that intro, dude, I'm really glad you picked that.
Glad you brought that up, because that intro is a clip from a song called Down and Out by the Seattle hardcore splatter rock band, The Accused. And it was immediately my first choice was to ask those guys if we could use that rather than hunt down some royalty-free thing, which there's a lot of great music out there for that kind of thing. Maybe even arguably more,
like rap.
Well,
like some rap. I mean, yeah, I know you're reaching for it, man. I know in the back of your mind. Yeah. Okay.
Just more applicable but for me, I have been a huge fan of those guys since I was 17. But yeah. I over the years, over the last like 20 years, I've gotten to know a couple of members. Great guys, Tommy Niemeyer and Blaine Cook. I don't know Tommy as much, but I know Blaine, the singer, and both guys have always treated me really well, sending me stuff, records, t-shirts, whatever. And I've always done everything I could to fly the flag for them. And so I just wanted to thank them for use of the song. It means a lot. And so if you have not heard of The Accused, go check them out.
Yeah, we got to put the link to the song. Yeah, in the show notes. And we got to put together some cool show notes for these people, man, because this is going to get deep. And speaking of deep, I mean, look, we're really the kind of guys that really get into what we're doing. And we prepare ourselves, man. I know, speaking for myself, I went through this extreme regimen of changing my diet. I started sleeping about 2 hours a day. Getting ready
for method viewing, huh?
Getting ready for this show. I was like the Buddha, I'm sitting there out in the wilderness and everything, or like the Iceman getting under freezing cold water for, a long time doing Wim Hof stuff. But no, reading and watching videos and kind of just preparing and everything. And I know that I did, but did you do any kind of reading or viewing and preparing yourself for this, buddy?
Dude, I'm always reading. I'm always watching.
Well, what did you read?
Peeking through them windows.
Yeah, all the time.
That's how I roll.
So what books were you reading in preparation for this, in the build-up, man? What were you focusing on?
It wasn't anything I was reading in preparation. After I burned sage every night for the last week. No. I did just read a really good book by actually a couple friends of mine, Matt Hayward and Robert Ford. They wrote this wonderful, highly entertaining book called A Penny for Your Thoughts, published by Poltergeist Press. Excellent book. I don't want to really go into, long synopsis or anything. Fans of, I think Joe Lansdale would probably really dig the book. It's great. They've got a sequel to the book coming out soon. I'm not sure when. Might even be out by the time we get this podcast out. I'm not really sure. A Penny for Your Thoughts by Matt Hayward and Robert Ford. Good guys. Excellent book.
Dude, I've been reading too, man. I've been reading a couple different things, and I'm like you, man. I'm reading all the time. And if I'm not reading, I'm either writing or I'm doing some kind of video or I'm watching a movie or something like that. And whether something for myself, something for this show, or something even with my children. But I bought a couple books recently. One of them is a real popular one by Joseph Campbell. It's called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And it's this it's a comparative mythology book. Okay. And he outlines what he calls the hero's journey. This is from the cover. It's this universal motif of adventure and transformation that runs through virtually all of the world's mythic traditions. It's extremely good. And I'm probably about 3/4 of the way right now through that book. And then I got one, I'm trying to remember, man, when I got this. I think I may have actually got this for Christmas. And then I just kind of didn't read it for a while. And so I just recently finished one called Being a Writer: Advice, Musings, Essays, and Experiences from the World's Greatest Authors. It's by Travis Elborough and Helen Gordon. And it's a fantastic book. It's kind of got this cool cover. It's one of these books you get over at Costco or whatever. And extremely good. And it's got all of these really cool kind of insights into how to get into writing, the mindset. What do you do with writer's block? There are some that just don't even believe in that. They say, I don't believe in writer's block. No such thing. Different ideas regarding your day. How do you structure your day as a writer? Should you wake up early? Or are you going to be, like Dostoevsky and Lovecraft that write at night? Right? There's only a couple that I think Leo Tolstoy, there's a quote from him that talks about people and authors that write at night and the kind of person that happens to be. And so super, super cool book. So I just finished that and I'm almost done with Hero of 1,000 Faces. But those are the books, man, that I've been reading. So, but you mentioned movies though.
Well, yeah, hang on. I want to say something about your book.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of things actually. I actually do. I'm from the camp that I think that writer's block is a farce. I do. I don't necessarily believe in it. I know that you have tougher days than others, but my understanding of writer's block, at least my definition of it, has a lot to do with not necessarily not wanting to write or not wanting to put your butt in a chair and get going, but more to do with lack of ideas, maybe. And if you're a writer, I just in most writers that I talk to, I have more ideas than I'll ever be able to use in a lifetime. There's just no way I'll get them all done. And I've got a file on my computer. I'm constantly writing them down. But the other thing, I'm a firm believer of never really having too many books on writing, because while some are better than others, I think it's one of those things where you can like pick the meat and leave the bones. Like sometimes you'll read a book that's like, you must do this, you must start at a certain time of the day, and you must do this many words, and you must outline, and you do the, and that's just not. And then you find a lot of books that say the opposite. This works for this person, this works for that person. Joan Lansdale, who I was talking about earlier, he does not believe in that structure at all. And which feels good. It is encouraging because he's very successful, excellent writer, and to know that somebody doesn't have a strict regimen that they're following. They don't have strict rules that they're following, and they're making it happen. So I prefer the books that are like, here's ideas that may or may not work for you. But I also wanted to ask if you've ever read Stephen King's On Writing. I know you're not. That's
quoted in this. Numerous times. Numerous times. And I was going to say, that's actually one of the strengths of this book, is that it doesn't have a unified plan. In fact, there's wildly opposing views, right? Of what writing is, of how to do it. Right. And the more structured it gets, I've come to find, and maybe, so I'm assuming there are certain authors that'll listen to this and go, I disagree with these guys. But some of the authors that they mention that have these very strict regiments and everything, I I didn't like that nearly as much. And I thought about it and said, I'm not even sure I like that their writing as much as the other ones.
Yeah.
They've got these really strict things, but it can be paralyzing to people. It can be debilitating where you get so caught up in the method of it. And I've done it myself. I'm writing a book. I'm writing a novel. It's a daunting task. It's the first book I've ever published, and it's a novel. It's a big one. And it's very personal too. Okay. It's based on a true story. But the thing is that, I've gone through so many notes about the symbols that I use and about the meaning of things. And I go through all of this and I write it out and I map it out and I put the names in and all this. And I realized, man, if I would have spent that time just writing it, I would have been done.
Yeah.
I would have been finished. And it would have been, I feel in a way, maybe more natural that, and not so, even in my own mind, forced, forcing this. And so I'm with you on that. And that's one of the things I think is the strength about that particular book.
Yeah. And, the thing about Stephen King's on writing, and to me, it's a shame. I think that the people who don't read horror or want to write horror, I think there are some people who tend to kind of, look away from that book as a reference book, which is a shame because I've read the book. I plan on reading. I wanted to read it like once every other year because it's great. But it's not a book for horror writers. It's just a book for writers, period. It doesn't go into, how to be scary. And, it has nothing to do with that. I mean, plus Stephen King's written plenty of non-horror, The Green Mile, Shawshank Redemption, Eyes of the Dragon, all kinds of, short stories and whatnot. But yeah, I wanted to encourage you. I bought my sister writes mainly poetry, but I wanted to, we had talked about the book. I ended up giving a copy to her, whatever, for Christmas. And I don't know if she's read it yet, but it's one of the best. And I've seen it on non-horror list for like best books on writing. So
I'm kind of pumped to read your sister's poetry, and I don't want to get too off in the woods on this, but seriously, man, that's one of the things I'm doing is I'm assembling my poems and essays and my prose, my speculative fiction that I've written over the years. It's been published in a couple collegiate literary journals. I actually won the Olivet College. I got the top honors for the school for writing for that, but I've never published it on my own. I thought, man, I need to polish them buggers up. And put them out there. I'll make $1 million. I mean, I'll obviously be super rich. Just like this. I mean, like, look, I wrote a book on poetry and bada boom, bada bing. All of a sudden,
that's how it happens, man.
That's how it happens.
You write a limerick, and you're swimming in an indoor pool.
Yeah.
All right, man. So you were asking about movies, and or TV series. I did have a couple series that I want to talk about or mention for a second. One of them I had avoided for a while. It had a kind of a silly name, and I didn't have high expectations for it at all. And I figured I'll try it. And I did. It's on Netflix. It's called Slasher. It's much more intelligent than I thought it was going to be. I watched the first season, and each season deals with a different storyline, which is something that's common among shows lately, like with say Mindhunter or True Detective, and what's another one? American Horror Story would probably be the most popular one. And this does that same thing, and it is a slasher, but they're intelligent slashers, kind of like whodunits too. They're definitely graphic, so they will appease the audience that needs that viscera in their horror. It's much more intelligent than something like not to put down Halloween or Friday the 13th, because I love them both, but it's much more intelligent than that. It's for a bigger audience. I don't know if you'd like it. You might. The wife liked it, but she complained about the acting, which I really didn't have any problems with. But
it's kind of interesting that it's called Slasher, and yet it's not. It's a smarter. What do they call those, man? Psychological thriller type things, or
well, lately there's a whole new subgenre. I don't know if you call it subgenre, but a new term. It's kind of like a pretentious elitist term called elevated horror. Movies like the Babadook and Hereditary, Midsommar, where it kind of like a thinking man's horror, something more cerebral.
So yeah, there's a backstory here. Yeah, it's inside baseball. The thing about the elevated horror, that's probably, and I mean, it's elitist, so it makes sense that I'd be into that. I'm kind of an aristocrat. I've always kind of believed that work was made so that other people had something to do while I was enjoying myself, but the idea of having this elevated or enlightened even sense of horror, that's kind of probably what I'm really into. And it may be why, I haven't seen Hereditary, but I've seen Midsommar, and I want to reserve any comments about Midsommar because I'm really hoping that we talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those movies that I think that would be really good for us to talk about. So I don't want to say too much about it right now, but it's a movie that I enjoyed for the most part. Yeah. It's a movie. The genre itself would be one that I would ordinarily totally enjoy. And I'll leave it at that.
To mention elevated horror, just one more thing. My theory on the term is it's sad that we have to have that, because my interpretation of elevated horror just means here we have an actual original film again. In this day and age when the Hollywood is constipated with Marvel and DC films and fantasy, Lord of the Rings, Star Trek and Star Wars and all this kind of stuff. And if not those, then remakes or sequels. So there's not a lot of originality being pumped out in through Hollywood. So when something truly original like Hereditary comes about, or maybe the Babadook or whatever, and it's deemed elevated horror, because the masses, I mean, if you look at movies like from the 70s, things like The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby, or there's just The Brood. There's just a ton of stuff that was just truly, absolutely original. Nothing had been done like that yet. And I guess if you were to go back to the 70s with this elevated horror term, you could even deem that elevated horror. But I think it's just a term that needs to be used now because someone managed to get their film into the masses and still keep their artistic integrity and be original about it. I think it's sad that we have to use that term.
What about you, man? Are you watching anything, or?
Dude, oh yes, man. And I'm like you. I watched a lot of stuff. I've got the TV on, and it's been kind of difficult a little bit. I got to say this, man, because I got my fraternity brothers. They might be watching, my spiritual fraternity brothers, and I'm part of this thing called Exodus 90, and the idea is to kind of take control of your life. Their ascetical practices, these ideas of about food and about even cold showers and stuff, and you're not supposed to watch unless it has stuff to do with your work. And so this is a fortunate thing, actually, in a way, and it's because I'm like, well, look, I'm doing a show about this, and so I'm watching a lot of things actually and taking notes though. So I mean, I'm taking notes, I'm going and I'm reading reviews from other people, but once a week I'm able to break the rule. Okay, and you pick a rule that you're able to break, and so I did. And I picked screen time where I'm able to watch with my kids because that's something we normally do. And we've kind of been at home here for a minute. And so the kids are constantly wanting to do this, and it makes it a little difficult. But we went back old school, man. And we've been watching Super Friends from like 1978. Wow. I think they may have actually been around even before 1978, but watching Super Friends, which is hilarious, but also Ren and Stimpy. And it's pretty cool, man, because I went and I looked up John Kay, right, the creator of Ren and Stimpy, after all this, and I was kind of thinking about it and the impact that Ren and Stimpy had on cartoons and the absurdism, right, the craziness of the whole thing.
They could arguably be responsible for this explosion of adult cartoons, even.
I think that cartoons, it could be argued that even Looney Tunes was a very adult thing. Like there were adult themes, or maybe it was just that, younger people were more adult-like back then, you know, when it first came around, you know, I mean, they're already taking care of the farm at age 7, you know, it's like, you know, I need to speak to the farm, you know, the farmer here. Oh, my boy, you know, so I don't know, maybe, you know, the nurses in the whole place are 12. And so it was one of those things. And, but I think you're onto something with the idea that a popular culture show, you know, you have, of course, The Simpsons. And The Simpsons came around before Ren and Stimpy. So The Simpsons would be, and The Simpsons had elements of absurdity too, but not to the level of Ren and Stimpy. I mean, Ren and Stimpy's taken it to a whole different place, and maybe even a little surreal, right? It's true as a cartoon. And you begin to see from there, if my timeline's correct, you begin to see after that stuff on MTV, stuff like The Max, and I forget the one with the huge head, a dude who had this massive brain or massive skull. You know, there was these weird cartoons, and of course Beavis and Butthead. And so, but Ren and Stimpy, if you look at a lot, and I would say even SpongeBob has been influenced, and in part because there are some people who've worked with SpongeBob who also did stuff with Ren and Stimpy. But John Kay, the influence of John Kay has been dramatic. And I went on because I've always admired it, right? At least his early stuff. I didn't like it when they came back. I felt that it was too adult, you know, and perverted. You know, I didn't like that. But the early stuff. And so, you know, I went and I looked up John Kay, and he's got this website, man. And he posts pretty regularly. I don't think there's a comment section, but people can find him on Instagram, I guess. But he posts his drawings. He's drawing pictures all the time, kind of lets you in on like what he's doing, the drafts that he's done of different people, but he's just sketching all the time. And so it was kind of a cool thing to go back and to rewatch these cartoons that had a big influence on me in my life and my understanding of media in this way. And I don't know, it's pretty awesome, man. So I was pretty pumped up about that. So Ren and Stimpy and Super Friends, man.
I didn't have such a good time with Super Friends. I mean, it was just one of those things I'd watch once in a while and could never figure out why the Wonder Twins couldn't like the one couldn't do anything that wasn't water related in some way.
That's actually a really tragic thing in this home. And I got to say this, man, part of it, and it's, you know, I don't want to mention too much about the idea of the book I'm writing, but this is part of it, is that the Super Friends play a role in that, because we have had a family tradition called pillow blankets, where the family gets together and we lay out as many pillows and as many blankets as we can, and we watch TV. You know, we'll turn on something and we'll watch it, but it had to be something that was kind of uplifting or innocent in its humor, you know, nothing scary, anything like that. So it started with Super Friends, and that's how it all began with my eldest daughter, Samantha. And she loved it, and it just took hold. And we for a long time, we kind of fell away from it. After my daughter died, we kind of fell away from watching Super Friends. And it wasn't until I think like a month and a half ago that one of my kids saw that Super Friends was on Amazon Prime, and they were like, we really want to watch this. And they all agreed. They all just really wanted to watch it. But man, they really dislike the Wonder Twins a lot. They're like, what are these about? Because they like the first ones because you had Wonder Dog, you know, and you had the brother and sister. I forget their name, but you had this brother and sister, and I don't even know if they really had powers. They're kind of goofy. Melvin, I think, was one of the names. And they had Wonder Dog. And then after that season is just over. And then the next season, it was the Super Friends Hour or whatever, Super Hour, Wonder Hour. And it was the Wonder Twins and their Wonder Twins Power Unite kind of thing. And it was, water. The boy is sitting there and he's like, I'm going to be an iceberg. And I'm thinking, why? You know, do you really, if you can be anything made out of ice, why wouldn't you be like an ice tank? Why water or mist? Like, what's up with that? Pick something that is awesome. And instead it's just not I want to be a bucket. Really? And so, so
the other one had to be animal, right? So if
An
he was a
yeah.
bucket of water, the other one would have to be an eagle, so that they could be dumped on whoever.
Yeah, right. Right, yeah, yeah. One has to be an animal, and one of them has to be a something related to water. And so
Yeah.
just weird, man, just weird stuff. And so we don't necessarily care for those, but they don't play as big of a role later. And they I think they fade out, man. But we'll see. We'll see as it goes along. Because I think we're into season 3 right now. But that's what I've been watching, man. So I've been watching Super Friends and Ren and Stimpy and getting pumped up for this show, brother.
I do have one other show that I've been watching that I had never heard of until I was hunting around on Amazon Prime, and it was it's a series called Thriller, and it was created in the UK, I think through 73 to 76, and I'm really surprised at how awesome each episode is. Each episode is either like a supernatural thriller or a whodunit or some kind of spooky, murderous element to it. And there's weird, the length of it is weird too. And I don't know if that's a UK thing or a 70s thing, but like each episode is like 63 minutes or something, like weird timing. But it's a great show, man. It's really
63 minutes.
Yeah. Like 63 minutes will be one episode and maybe 66 minutes for another one. Yeah, they had to squeeze that extra 3 minutes, but the stories are, you'd think that watching like something like this, you would think that being, after so many years of being on the planet and reading, horror comics and watching Tales from the Crypt and Twilight Zone and Night Gallery and stuff, that all of that would be kind of be old hat and predictable. And the storylines would just be kind of cliche, but these really aren't. They were kind of ahead of their time. So I would recommend that for anybody who's into that kind of like TV show that's 63 minutes long.
63 minutes. That cracks me up, man.
Well, that's it for me, man. If that's all you got, I mean, we can get straight to the main meat of the podcast.
Yeah, let's talk about it, man.
Let's do it.
Let's do this. This Wild at Heart.
Mm-hmm.
David Lynch, man.
Yeah.
I'd never seen it before. In fact, to be brutally honest, I'm putting the cards on the table, man, is that I don't even recall being aware of the movie. I was unfamiliar with that. Kind of like I'm unfamiliar with many Van Halen songs. It's from a time period of life. I don't know if that's good or bad, but if I really missed out on too much. But the thing is that this movie, I did miss out on something. I think that this was an interesting movie, and I'm really glad, because we were talking, man, about what we want to do and how we wanted to begin this. And this seems like a good decision in hindsight. In fact, in hindsight, that it was a good decision, because for a lot of different reasons that we're going to get into.
Yeah, I saw the movie 1990, I guess is when it came out. I saw it, I believe the year that it came out. And I think I may have seen it 10 years later again. I can't remember, but it had been a really long time since I saw it. So there was a lot that I didn't remember. All I knew was that it was first or second in my favorite David Lynch films, because it really had an impact on me. And even though I hadn't seen it in so long, it's films like that I really drew a lot of inspiration from in some of my writing, like SKULLFACE Boy. So it was great to revisit it again. And I had recently bought the Blu-ray. I had been wanting that for a long time, and I finally just sprung for it. And so I thought personally that it would be a good one, a good first one, to kind of set the tone that we are going to be, some of the stuff we're going to be digging. I mean, not super deep, not like super underground cult, although we will touch that.
Yeah.
But that's not what Wild at Heart is. I mean, it does have a cult following. It's not so deep that it's, for the snobby elitist, but it is kind of deep even for a Lynch film, because when you think of Lynch, you think of Blue Velvet, you think of Eraserhead and Twin Peaks. Not normally Wild at Heart, and it's a shame. and it's my favorite. I'm not a big Nicolas Cage fan. I think that he's great at a certain type of role. Same with Keanu Reeves, and they're perfect at a certain something. And sometimes I have a hard time digesting a movie that they're in if they're trying to do something that's outside of that. And I mean, God bless them for trying, but sometimes personally, it's hard for me to take seriously. Not to say that Nicolas Cage has not done any good. You know, what was it? Leaving Las Vegas, he was really good in, and he's been good in other stuff too. But I felt like this role was like, he was able to be that crazy, wild Nicolas Cage that we're all familiar with, that he tries to be in other films. Well, he could be that and more in.
And he was charming.
Yeah.
I felt, in fact, almost adorable at times, you know, and I mean that. I felt like, and I got to say this too, is that this was the first thing with Lynch that I had ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
I've never, and so this is really kind of my virginity moment on this, because I'd never seen, in fact, and this is going to, people can mock me all they want, but I've never seen Twin Peaks.
Right.
Yeah. Never saw it.
You're missing out.
I'm telling you, I believe it now. I believe that I am. And it was mind blowing. And I wanted to say something here, and I'm hoping that I'm able to get this on the camera, because here's the thing. About, I don't know, man, 3 weeks ago. Well, no, I guess it was a little bit more than that, because it was before the whole stay at home thing, right? So we're kind of in the thick of it. We're not going to talk about that. Okay, that's the world out there. Okay, this is us. But before all that happened, okay, just to give you a sense of place in all this, before that happened, I went to a coffee shop, and one of the coffee shops here in town is called the Bitter End, and they have one of those the book trades, you know, you can leave a book and take a book type of thing. And so I go in there, and every time I check it out, maybe once, you know, it's a Kerouac book, and I've got some other things, but check this out, man. Look at this. Look at that.
That was in there, really?
Yes. Lynch on Lynch, bro. Yeah.
Edited by Chris Radley. That's great.
It was fantastic. And so when you said this, and I really didn't know anything about it, but I saw this in the back, you know, it says, David Lynch erupted onto the cinema landscape with Eraserhead, establishing himself as one of the most original, imaginative, and truly personal directors at work in contemporary cinema. I didn't know when I would read it, because I have a respectable library. I've got, you know, hundreds of books. So I didn't know if or when I would read this, but it sounded really cool, and it sounded like something that I would enjoy reading if or when I ever got around to it. And so when the idea came up, hey, let's watch this movie, okay, Wild at Heart, no clue. You said Nicolas Cage, you know, I don't really know, you know, about that. But then you said David Lynch, and I'm like, I'm like, wait a second, I've got something. And so it's almost providential, man. It's one of those Jungian things, those meaningful accidents that take place in life that I think that this is kind of, and there's meaningful accidents in this movie, you know, that kind of have there's kind of a symbolic meaning behind that's something that happened on the outside in life that's also happening internally, that together, when brought together, will kind of show a direction for things. And so I thought it was really cool that this is the movie that we decided to do first. Yeah,
there's also very brutal accidents in there, like blowing your own head off with a shotgun.
Yeah,
an accident.
Yes.
Okay, so let's get into like initially. Let's just talk about the first. Well, for those who aren't familiar with the Wild at Heart, it is a kind of a tragic romance, sort of. It's definitely a romance. It has some darker bits, definitely surrealism, and like we mentioned, it's the screenplay is written by David Lynch, and he directed it, but it was written. The writer of the actual book is Barry Gifford.
He said that it was. What did he say? That it was finding love in hell. Is how he described it. He said it's a love story that goes through a strange highway in the modern and twisted world. And for Lynch anyway, it's just a compilation of ideas that comes along. The darker ones and the light ones, the humorous ones, all working together. I think it's a good description for it.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
So the first 10 minutes when you're sitting down and you just started this film, you really don't know anything about it, you've never seen Lynch before, you are being deflowered.
Yeah.
Okay. What were your thoughts on the first initial 10 minutes?
Well, in fact, the very beginning, and I felt I'd like to know what building that was.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I didn't look that up. I didn't have time ahead of time, but I loved the painting. You have these kind of looming ceilings way overhead. It's a beautiful, beautiful building, and they're coming through the entrance, and they're walking down steps. Okay, which I think that's pretty symbolic too, that they're going down. It's a descent, and they're looking up at the overhead, and I wanted to see the paintings in the ceiling, because I almost wondered if it's kind of angels in the architecture type thing, and that also is meaningful to this. But as soon as he walks in, a loving couple, they seem happy, you know, kind of go lucky a little bit white trash. Not gonna lie, kind of the way he's dressed and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
It looks a little white trash, but stylish, almost dapper.
I felt like he drew from Elvis playing that character. There was
Totally.
the way,
Totally.
you know, his swagger and his kind of like drawl or whatever, and just his demeanor. It just reminded me of like kind of like this rebellious young Elvis, I guess.
You know, he's a stylish white trashy guy.
Yeah.
And she's adorable, beautiful, and right away, and we're talking the first minute and a half, there's a major time altercation that involves Nicolas Cage just throwing the guy against the wall, and he's bashing his head, and there's blood going everywhere, and they're gasping, but nobody's trying to stop it. And then he gets up and he takes a breath, and he puts a cigarette in his mouth and lights it, and real slowly points his finger up at this woman in the balcony overhead, and there are a bunch of rich people up there. And he points up, and now he's at the bottom of the stairs now. So, I mean, the descent is all the way to the bottom. And he points up to the balcony at this very rich lady. And there's this really tense moment where it's quite obvious there's something going on between these. Well, there you go. That's the intro to the film. Welcome to Wild at Heart.
It sets the tone for the rest of the movie that you're not safe. And then at any given moment, something, wild's going to happen, I guess.
I think it kind of gives an idea for him, too, the main character. His name's Sailor. It's quite obvious that he's troubled. It's quite obvious that there's something. I mean, his reaction, it's one thing to be against somebody. I mean, if somebody comes up and says, I'm going to kill the girl, or I'm going to kill you, you're obviously going to defend yourself. You're going to do this. But it was about honor, I feel, for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like he had that kind of Southern sensibility in a way, that, you know, almost like the dual mentality that you've offended my honor, you know, or you've threatened me, and I'm going to not just hurt you or stop you or prevent this from happening, but your brains are going to be on the ground.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where he was with this, but it really kind of gives him a sense too, that he's not so much about preserving himself as much as he is for defending the dignity of his girl. And in fact, that comes to play a number of times, including in a crazy scene where they're at a concert. And the Elvis comes out there too.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Well, he sings by singing the Elvis song.
Yes.
But yeah, even at the beginning, he's well aware of the outcome, because when the guy confronts him, says why he's there and what he's going to do, Sailor immediately, he just says, uh-oh. And he's saying that to himself. Like, and he says it twice, like, it's going to hit the fan. You don't even know, dude. I'm going to lose it here in a second. And he does.
Oh, he totally loses it. Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, when they are showing the camera at the very beginning, and you see the ceiling and you hear the music, sometimes films are hard for me to get into, because I know that I could have maybe 20 minutes to a half hour of not being that attached to a film, because there's got to be some character development, maybe some backstory and all this kind of stuff. And sometimes I'm not really in the mood to hear all of that, but that like little boring, sweet music with the ceiling and stuff lasts about 45 seconds. And then the movie, immediately begins. And so from that point through the rest of it, was just such a great ride.
And it sets the tone that it's going to be over the top, outlandish, to the point of being absurd even. Mm-hmm. You know, that nobody was running to stop it. That nobody, there were gasps but it's like spectators. Like they were just very calm, the wealthy people up on the balcony as they're looking down. It wasn't just the worst dread in the world. But what you're seeing, if people saw that, I mean, it would be traumatizing.
Yeah.
What happened to actually witness that? And it's got the opposites, you know, where on the one hand, the very dignified, and yet on the other hand, you know, this idea of duplicity and, you know, paying people to murder people, like right out of the gate. So it's set in this thing that's supposed to be beautiful and grand and all of this, you know, the angel and the architecture type thing. And yet right away you have a descent. Right away you have the conflicting opposites of the music that's soft and kind of this classical sound to it, plunging neck deep into metal, right out of the gate. It's just squealing metal, right? I mean, really intense. And this place where you go from being kind of a dignified guy wearing your suit and stuff to a guy covered in blood, you know, and then going from the extreme of just murdering a guy to standing up and very calmly lighting a cigarette to then very intensely pointing a finger. And so you have those real rapid cycling of emotions and opposites. That was, to me, as a newcomer to Lynch stuff, it blew my mind. I was like, I'm here for the ride.
So as a whole, the movie as a whole, as far as like, which is something that bothers me in any book or a movie. I mean, was there at any point other than just being like, yeah, the guy's probably going to get the girl and keep her at the end? I mean, he had her, but keep her. Was there any, did you ever, you know, what's your opinion on just like the movie as far as like being predictable?
The predictability dynamic. Well, I'll put it this way. I disagreed with Cinephilia Beyond. The person who was writing over there said that between senseless shouting matches and sex scenes, which, by the way, as a disclaimer, there are in fact a kind of copious amount of sex scenes in it. But I think that we can talk about that later. But the criticism is that there was this sense of aimlessness in character development and momentum, and there were these repetitions and flashback structure that made it feel repetitive and tired. I disagree with that.
Yeah.
I disagree with that. I feel that on the one hand, it was pretty unpredictable because you have such weird characters, but yet I felt that the characters, they were consistent throughout the whole thing. There wasn't an inconsistent character. You don't have Sailor or Lula all of a sudden acting differently, right? Lula being the girlfriend, played by Laura Dern. Okay. You don't have her go from being a maiden type, which she was, to a warrior type. You have her go from a maiden to a mother. You have him go from a hero to a hero that has, at the end, realized the journey. The mother, Lula's mother, is played by Diane Ladd, which happens to actually be Laura Dern's actual mom.
Yep.
And she goes from being the protective mother to being kind of a trickster. Well, that works together. So I didn't feel that there was any in regards to character development and in regards to character predictability and kind of the decisions that they would make in certain situations. I felt that it was coherent, predictable, but not boilerplate. It also featured, I guess, the plot, right? The sequence of events in this story did have some things in it that were way out of the blue, that if there is a criticism leveled against it, I would say that may be one of the stronger ones, is that there are some things in there that came and went, and there was never explanation for them. And so there's kind of random elements that at times, and even the stuff that some people like.
I get what you're saying, but for me, it was just part of the Lynchian experience. Like, you're going to, I mean, there was so many random parts in there that made it a David Lynch film, but it could have, it could have also presented as being, the stuff like that is random anyway. Accidents, driving by, enjoying life, and then all of a sudden you see it's not something, thankfully, that happens often to people, but it does happen. Anytime there's an accident, somebody's going to stumble upon it. I mean, granted, this one was a little bit different. There was nobody else around, and they were basically, the first people to see what was happening. But the randomness took it to this really disturbing level because it really came out of nowhere, driving at night and seeing clothes on the road and then wondering where they came from and then running across this. But as far as like predictability, I almost feel like because of the characters and how quirky they were, the predictable meter almost shouldn't even be really in the equation, because even if it was predictable, it's so not because of those characters. The mother, she wasn't just a psychopath who you could tell she was a psychopath because of her actions by going off after Sailor and wanting him dead and wanting her daughter back. She was doing insane stuff, covering her entire face and hands with lipstick. That kind of, which brought this like surreal creepiness to something rather than just and that's just another thing that it's a Lynchian thing.
The best explanation that I've heard, other than that it's just a Lynchian thing, and for somebody, if they've only seen this, right, that would be substantiated by seeing other movies, which I plan to do. Okay, at this point, I'm willing to even go down the road of like, hey man, Twin Peaks, here I come. But synchronicity, right? This Jungian idea that there's a meaningful relationship through symbolic meaning. This idea of a meaningful coincidence. I mentioned that earlier. That's similar to what happened here. That you had the situation where they seem so happy, so satisfied. They're together. They're in this bar and they're talking, and he's boasting about his experiences and with women kind of thing. And she's like, man, you're really a naughty guy. And, and she's really into this. Like, she's excited by that. And she just is so happy to be with him. Like, that's a really special thing to be with this particular man. And she says, we got to get up to the bedroom, and, I can't take it anymore, kind of thing. And he's like, well, darling, you got to be real careful. You got to take it easy on me, because tomorrow we got to wake up early and we got a lot of things we got to do. Okay. Yeah. Because they got these plans together to get out of there. The thing is that it ends up being the most wild of all the sexual encounters in the movie. Yeah. It goes on for a long time. And she finds out she's pregnant after that. Right. And shortly after finding out she's pregnant, before she tells him, they have an accident. There's an accident. Right. I think that the idea of synchronicity, that is a symbol of this, that things are going fine on the road, and all of a sudden, boom, and it's that might be, but
for sure, yeah, without a doubt, yeah, because it didn't have anything to do with the movie. It was just a very oddball, and those are some of the most entertaining scenes for me, just because they didn't make any sense, and they were taken completely out of context, and I love that. I love that a lot. So, let's say a few words about the acting. What's weird is that Lynch, he has this way of commanding his actors to, I wouldn't say act poorly, but do things exaggeratingly so, and not necessarily a comical way, but an almost disturbing way, kind of. If you see Lula, whenever she cries, she always has her hands above her hair and stuff, like some 50s monster movie with a woman screaming or something like that. She buckles her knees, and then of course the mother with her freaking out, and everything is kind of exaggerated. And this is a common theme in Lynch's stuff. So it's not like he grabs actors that can't act. He somehow commands them to do something, and I don't know what it is. I can't quite put my finger on it. So your average person who might not know about that, or who might not be able to appreciate Wild at Heart, I could see saying, well, the acting was horrible, because they didn't understand exactly that the characters are supposed to be like this, that this is how the movie is supposed to play out.
I don't want to dog I watched a film not long ago. It's an independent film, so I won't name it, because they did it. They made a film. Okay. And it was really low budget. And, but the person who wrote it also directed it, also produced it, also started. So there's a lot of this going on, but I got to give them credit for this. Okay. Got to give her credit for this. But there were people in that film that were super bad at acting.
Yeah.
And most of the people in the film were B or C level people. I mean, they're pretty far down there. But then you had individuals in that movie that were way bad, and they stood out. How did they get a role in this? You know, hey, please don't die. That would be really terrible. I hope you come back. That's just, it was so terrible, the acting. And it really reflected poorly on the others. Whereas with this, I felt that everybody was kind of on the level with this. And it reminded me almost of the way that the acting has to be done in films. It's not the same, obviously, because you couldn't get away with it with this. But movies like Waiting for Guffman, that's not necessarily the greatest acting in the world. It fits it, and it's necessary. And in that sense, it's great acting. And I feel like for this, it was the same way. And maybe that doesn't make any sense. I'm hoping that people who listen or who've seen movies like Waiting for Guffman, that they can go, I know what he's saying. I know what he's saying with this. So I thought that their acting was excellent because it fit exactly what the movie was.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you think about the dialogue? There's some really some stuff in particular, like the line that Sailor, he said a couple times about his jacket.
Yes, it's a symbol of his individuality and his belief in personal freedom.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. And by the way, that was actually Nicolas Cage's jacket.
Yeah, I did read that.
Yeah. It's a snakeskin jacket.
He ended up giving it to Laura Dern. Yeah, I loved some of that dialogue. There's definitely some memorable lines. Probably the most memorable ones would be kind of like the quirky, lines, like at the motel with my dog barks some. You might picture my dog, or whatever, that guy, which is actually the actor who plays Eraserhead, and he's in Twin Peaks as well.
And he's talking about his dog barking, and you probably know in your head, kind of, you got an image in your brain of what it looks like, and it's such a random little conversation. It seems random, but I feel that it's kind of one of those things that also plays into the psychological dynamic of what appears to be Lynch to me, being a newcomer on this. But the idea of these symbols are what they are, in archetypal, and that people can say, for example, draw an apple, and it almost always looks kind of the same. It's like a heart almost a little bit, but it's kind of rounded out at the bottom, and it has a little reflection mark maybe on one of the little glare window looking thing on one of the sides of it, and it's got a stem and a leaf. There are no apples in real life that look like that. Right? It's totally fake. But if you say, man, I was eating an apple, and even though I haven't told you what kind of apple I was eating or what it looked like, you have an image of an apple in your mind. That's kind of the same thing in the movie with mother, hero, trickster. These ideas of what they are, that they transcend this specific character. So we have in our minds what they are. Even the story itself, the overriding myth of the film, which would be the Wizard of Oz, maybe even the religion of the film.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said too, quickly, about the editing of the film itself was, and not just with the music, but like you were talking about earlier, the match strikes, and there was even some, like there's that underlying theme with the Wizard of Oz. And so there were like scenes with the crystal ball or, the witch and stuff like that. A lot of odd choices. But again, it's David Lynch, and if you're familiar with him, you expect it. I would imagine Lynch being fairly new at the time, I can see people maybe saying that those were odd choices. But I appreciated them because it made the film that much more original, doing those odd choices. One of the odd choices being to use, metal music in areas that you maybe normally wouldn't use. What are some of the standout scenes for you that you enjoyed the most?
The scene where the mother is losing her mind, and that on the one hand, she's kind of initiated a path with old Santos that he's gonna kill somebody, and that she's connected with this, and she's connected with a lot of death, man. Like you'll find out in the movie, she's she's a wicked person, and so you're seeing though the internal conflict express itself with her putting this red makeup on her wrist, like she's like it's suicide. Okay. And then it gets bigger and bigger, and there's more makeup, and then there's makeup all over her face, and then next thing you know, it's on her arms and it's on her face, and her whole body is basically pinkish red.
It's red,
and,
yeah, like
Oompa
Loompa.
Yeah, like Oompa Loompa. Yeah. And so it brings out almost the demonic, the idea that she is the red devil. But I also like the scene where Lula is talking with Sailor, and they're in the hotel, and they're talking about basically how she first lost her virginity, and she lied to him. In fact, and maybe it was that she's lying to herself too, that she's suppressing a terrible memory, and saying basically, not only that, that she said how it happened, which was already bad enough, but then she said her mother knew nothing about it. But then there's a flashback moment, which I also liked, by the way, and I know some critics criticize that. I thought that it added to it, because she's saying, well, no, my mom never knew anything about it, and come to find out, oh yes, the mom definitely knew stuff about it, and not only did she know stuff about it, but she did something about it later that was also hidden and suppressed. Okay, that comes back through a flashback. That's a rather painful thing for Lula to have to reflect on and think about. So I felt that those were some of my favorite. And I will say this, and this is maybe a little controversial, but I will say it, is that on the one hand, I was taken off guard by the sexuality in the film. I am a devout Roman Catholic, and so I have certain beliefs and values, sexual ethics and stuff like that. But I'm also an artist, and I understand how this played into the film. And I know that some people could say, well, this was gratuitous. These sex scenes and stuff, that they were gratuitous. But I feel that without them, it would not have, number one, it wouldn't have been such a stark contrast with from the midway point of the movie forward, where she finds out she's pregnant, and where they don't do it again in the rest of the film. If it was that they did it once.
I think it has that part that you're talking about, and you were talking about that earlier. I think that has less to do with her being pregnant and more to do with the incident with Bobby Peru, because things didn't seem to really turn dark until they got there, and then Bobby Peru came in there. I think it was like the perfect storm. I think that she was starting to be unsure of their future, where they were headed. Things were starting to turn dark, and these people that they were meeting. And then when Bobby Peru came in there and did his thing, she was maybe unsure. She probably had a lot of guilt about what happened, because there was some submission there, and like you were talking, it would be, I guess, considered psychological rape. But that probably really threw her really confused her.
I would agree. However, they didn't, the absence of sex, from the frequency of sex, because it was like 5 scenes basically, and they're not long except for the one where she gets pregnant from it. That's the what you're assuming, right? Yeah, it could have been any of them, but the assumption in the sequence of events is that this really intimate one, that was a powerful thing, and where it was loving and everything, that was really what it was. But from there, what was interesting is that the color changes too. The color changed from reds, pinks, blues, and reds to black, and that by the time they get to the place, they're wearing not.
And let me just point out, I know what you're talking about, because we did talk about this before. You're kind of maybe more specifically talking about the clothes that she wore. I think the movie started in pink, and then red, and then toward the end.
Even him, he had a blue shirt.
Yeah,
and so there was the sense of blues and pinks, boys and girls type thing. Red for the passion and love and the fire, right? That goes with that.
Mhm.
And then once she was aware of this, you start to see the colors in what they're wearing. It starts to change, and by the time you get to when the scene with Willem Dafoe, the psychological rape scene, which they say is rape at the Lynchian version of rape is rape at the level of language. Okay, if I'm remembering it correctly. But the William Dafoe scene, William Dafoe comes in, he sees her, she's wearing black lingerie, and she's wearing red shoes, so it still has the fire there, right? And he comes in and he's wearing all black. And if I'm remembering correctly, Sailor is working on his car, so he's already assumed the fatherly role, kind of falling back into this world of like, he's not wearing his jacket, he's outside, he's working on a car, and he's wearing all black. So there's a lot of the colors have changed, and she is multiple times looking at this horse. There's a right next to her where she's laying, there's a nightstand and there's a horse, and there's no rider on it. I think that is symbolic of kind of hoping that he will be the man to mount the horse of their relationship, and not just sexually, but ultimately in a bigger scheme, that he will fulfill the man part of this, because she's not going to do with this child and doesn't want to do with the child what happened to the child that resulted, the secret that resulted from her being violated in the flashback, the memory, and the controlling wicked witch mother that brought her to a place to abort the child.
Hitchcock did the clothes thing too. I don't know if you've ever seen Psycho. At the beginning of the movie, the woman who steals the money, she's wearing a white underwear, a white bra, and then once she steals the money and basically goes, rogue with the money, she's wearing black, and that was done purposefully to show like good and evil, yin and yang.
And so that's the only reason why I would say that the sex slowed down and stopped at the point where they realized that responsibility was there, because what drove them was the individuality and the freedom.
Yeah, and the freedom.
You're right. And so I think that once that happened, it was like, what next? Where do we go with this? Is it the same? Which is also kind of the idea that it went from we just do it like jackrabbits to I'm going to put on sexy red high heels and black lingerie. That is a signal that in the previous life wasn't necessary, because they were just constantly boning. Just what it was. And so there was no need for that, where now that is part of that. And I felt that Lynch did a brilliant job of showing almost the arc of domestication.
My standout scenes where I really liked I like the scene where they're at the metal show, and Sailor stops the band just with the motion of his hand, and that whole surreal moment of putting that confrontational moment. I love confrontational scenes like that, where somebody is going to get put in their place, and I really liked that, and just the fact that you've got this they're not quite death metal, but this metal band up there who all of a sudden knows how to play an Elvis song along with Nicholas at his request. I like that scene a lot, and how he flicked his cigarette, and just in real quick movements made the guy basically put the cigarette out with his hand by throwing him down to the ground. But I also liked I liked, and this is almost, I wouldn't say a similar scene, but that it's the other dance scene where Sailor's in the back seat sleeping because he's wore out, and Lula is driving, and she's just hearing all this bad news on the radio. People dying, all this weird stuff happening, and she can't take it anymore. So she has a little meltdown and parks the car, and she's like, "You get me something on that radio right now." And he gets some metal on there, and they start doing. He does his karate moshing thing that he does, whatever he does, and she does her thing, and I like that scene. I also like the motel scene where Bobby Peru is introduced, and then we get to meet the some of the other weird characters. But my favorite scene, I think, in the whole movie is the scene where Bobby Peru comes in where Lula is alone, because it's super intense. It's really disturbing. And William Dafoe is so good. And you don't know exactly what's going to happen or where it's headed. And the whole time you're just like begging this girl not to, because you know that her and Sailor have a great relationship. It may not be healthy on some levels, but they're happy. Mm-hmm. And anytime somebody sways away from that and you watch it happen, your heart kind of breaks. And so to watch that and be like, girl, just stand your ground, or Sailor, come busting in and take care of this. So you weren't sure. And then Lynch has this way with, and you'll see it in other movies, he uses sound and like a droning ambience in a lot of his stuff, Twin Peaks and a lot of his movies, that really is untraditional. And he used a loud sound when Willem Dafoe kind of just flipped and screamed at her. And it was really startling. And I really like that quite a lot. And then the second that she, quote unquote, submits, then he just puts on this goofy face and he said, "I'd love to, but I got to get going." And then so you're taken for this ride of just like, extremely intense, disturbing moment. And then all of a sudden it's just like that. It's over. And you're supposed to maybe laugh even at Bobby Peru. But Sailor was a great character, but I really loved the Bobby Peru character too. He was just he was such a greaseball, so slimy.
More than the rampant sex scenes, right? Mm-hmm. More than that scene was the line for me. It was where I was like, dude, where's this going? It was very uncomfortable to watch. Mm-hmm. Because, for clarification for people, I mean, Defoe comes in and finds her there alone. You've got Sailor outside working on his car, doing in fact, the fatherly thing, the husbandly thing. And she's in there waiting for him, longing for the man to mount the horse, right? Looking at that image. And Defoe comes in and she's very uncomfortable with him being in there. And he says, he just got to use the bathroom real quick. Right. It's quite obvious he's there for a weird reason. And there's no gentlemanly honor in him. He's just pure bad. Yeah. He walks in, he sees her dressed like that. He should have said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." Oh no. He's like, "Oh no, it's okay. I'm just going to use the bathroom." So he's getting himself in, he's forcing himself on the situation. And then he gets up to her and he begins talking to her really closely. And she backs away. She's very guarded. She wraps her arm around her waist and her chest. Okay. And backs away from, keeps her social distancing. so she's keeping her distance from him. And he gets closer and closer and closer. And eventually grabs a hold of her now in a very forceful way. I mean, he's controlling the situation at this point physically. And she shoves him away once. And to me, that was like, good. Like, oh, I'm so glad about that. But then it was, is she pushing him away, or is it the push and pull? Right? Is it that push and pull that's in a weird relationship? Even with things like, and we're talking about this, so we can say this, right? The idea of rape fantasy. And as I said, this is the line in the movie for me. This is like, I'm not down with Defoe. I'm not down with that character, man. What that character did it's brutally evil. It's a Weinstein. It's a Harvey Weinstein moment, actually. And I think that's actually maybe even more what it's playing into, the idea of a make or break type character that everyone in the area thinks is the real star for whatever reason, even though physically grotesque looking, the mouth, thick gums and everything. He looks gross. Just slimy. The thing is that kind of thing happens, and it's a power move. And I think that's why Lynch used that, was to talk about how it's done with power, even at the level of language, and that can be extrapolated to a number of different circumstances that aren't so explicitly sexual.
Yeah, which is ironic considering how nasty the guy was. So I wanted to talk about the soundtrack, but we're running short of time. But your overall thoughts of Wild at Heart. I mean, and your rating, I guess.
My rating, as someone who loves film, as someone who is not afraid to look into the abyss of human nature, the way that people think, the way that people act, into reality, because I think that this is really a reflection of the real in many ways, the absurdity and the darkness, as well as the innocence and the kind of moral roadmap that's there that can preserve even people who may not be the best at reason. But I would say that I would give that, and I'd give it a 4.8, like almost a 5. It is not a movie for everybody, but for people who are into film and the art form of this and delving into that level of darkness to analyze the human condition, I think that this film is a must see. In fact,
I can't think of anything that I don't like about it. I would have to. It just it scratches so many itches for me, and it's just for me. It's just so original, and I really like love stories anyway. So I'm just gonna give it a full 5 stars because I mean I like it. I like the soundtrack, the editing. I just love the way that Lynch has his characters act and the weird scenes that are put in there that don't distract from the real story, but just enough to kind of remind you that you're in his world and just give you almost like I don't know if I'd call it comic relief, but just knowing that through this whole ride at any given moment, you could have another really oddball character or oddball scene that is not going to make any sense at all. But in this world, it's just commonplace. And I love that. And that's why that right there was my influence for SKULLFACE Boy. So that kind of thing. But
I want to say, I guess another thing about it is like, even the happy ending part that people are like, well, look, all the bad happened. And was it convincing that they came together in the end? Right. And that he didn't leave. Cause in the book, he walks away. They don't get together. Mm-hmm. And I thought, and they said, well, the character arc, and maybe it was lacking and it wasn't very convincing of this. And I felt like, but that's so human again. Right. I mean, it's we can almost all imagine certain people that we've even known who maybe it's not the deepest relationship in the world. Maybe they're not the brightest bulbs on the tree. Right. Okay. And so that's just who they are, but they love life. They love each other. And that's just the way it is. And they're 2 peas in a pod. You just go, I can't actually imagine that person with anybody else. And I can't imagine anybody other than Lula for Sailor and anyone for Sailor but Lula, back and forth, both of them, that they are, the idea that they would be with anybody else is totally absurd. And the last thing is just simply this, that I liked the Lynch guy over at oons.com. He said that when people complained that it was nihilistic and stuff, he was saying that the road may lead through the wasteland, right, in which the moral order is almost entirely hidden by a fallen and degenerate world, and visible only in these fleeting glimpses and grotesque guises. But even in this world, what is right by nature still has the power to bring the film to a satisfying conclusion. And I felt that was true. And I felt that it was not just true, but that it was true even according to Lynch in the book and there's a quote that I underlined that was really good. And he said that he was asked the question, if you saw the world as wild at heart and weird on top at the beginning of the 90s, and you think it's continuing to get worse, what do you think's causing it? And he says, I'll tell you what it is. Each year we give permission for people to get away with more. We do it by being disorganized, being without leadership, not making decisions fast enough, and not holding true to things that were in place to begin with. Then it gets easier to give more away. I don't know when we started giving it away, but it reminds me of Dune. I started giving something away early on, only just a little bit, and then I'd give away a little bit more. Pretty soon you've got a problem. And I felt that was both of those statements, both the guy at Oons and the statement here, can kind of summarize my full take on the film and what it said to me, and what it says about America, not just in the 90s, but today.
So Jeremiah, did you walk away with any kind of like moral from this story?
Anybody with teeth like Willem Dafoe, just steer clear. He's obviously got a lot of problems. He's not brushing, he's not flossing. He looks like, he's been using sandpaper as a toothbrush. And, macaroni and cheese, the powdered cheese as his toothpaste. I mean, it's just a terrible look.
He looks like instead of brushing his teeth, he's just pulling his gums over his teeth a little at a time.
I just gotta imagine, dude, just slowly like pulling at it, man, like Play-Doh, just over the teeth. Oh, it's so grody. Hey, what did you take away from this, man?
Oh, well, I really want a snakeskin jacket. Badly.
You need a snakeskin jacket, Chad.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are the kind of guy. I'm serious, man. You're the kind of guy that I think would look pretty cool in a snakeskin jacket. I would not.
I can pull it off.
You could totally pull it off, man.
Yeah,
totally. It's your style, it's your frame, the way you walk. You got that really cool stride. You got cool hair.
Swagger.
You got the swagger. And so, yeah, man. I think you do really good on that.
Well, maybe I can find one on eBay someday.
I'm telling you, you can find a lot of stuff on eBay. Yeah, maybe even the remains of Willem Dafoe's teeth.
Well, that's our thoughts on David Lynch's Wild at Heart. That's the end of episode 1. So
it's the end of episode 1, man. And people have to like, subscribe, share, comment, and make sure to email us. We have an email, Chad, don't we?
Yeah, that is PaleoCheeze@gmail.com.
Yeah,
we also
super
have
duper easy
Twitter and a Instagram.
And cheese with a Z.
Yes.
Yeah, and cheese with a Z. So make sure to subscribe on all of those things. Like, share, comment, let your friends know. And if you have movie suggestions, we're always open to it, and different sources of videos to watch for review. We'd love to hear from you. So make sure, again, go ahead and email us at PaleoCheeze. That's PaleoCheeze @gmail.com. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
We'll see you.